Is February 1st, 2018. My name is Blair Williams. I'm here at the Cumberland County Historical Society with Dick Calaman.
That's correct.
Good afternoon, Dick. How are you doing today?
Thank you. It's fine.
All right. Well, to start off with, where did you grow up?
I was born in Carlisle.
Yep.
Outside of Carlisle, and then raised in Carlisle, graduated from high school here, and returned after in the service for 4 years, and after being around the world a couple of times, I didn't find any place I liked any better. So I came back to Carlisle, and been here all my life, with the exception of a few years of service and school, of course.
Sure. What did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
Well, my father, he was in the restaurant business, and my grandfather too. They had the original right across the street, the St. Charles Cafe. Mm-hmm. My grandfather founded that thing with the bonus he got from World War I, and that's where it started. He started there. And my father, during the Depression, which I'm old enough to remember, I was a youngster then, but I remember he worked in the shoe factory here in Carlisle, which there were several shoe factories, and he was making $8 a week. Right prior to World War II, my grandfather hired my father. It wasn't his, that was his father-in-law, that wasn't his father. Hired him to the restaurant and paid him $50 a week, which is astronomical. We thought we were really into chips. Yeah. And that started him in the restaurant business, and he was in that his whole life at a couple of different places. After my grandfather died, he founded the Belair House restaurant, which was in the old Elks building. Dad bought that when I was overseas in Korea. He bought that, sent me the only letter I received from him in 4 years, telling me he's going to put a restaurant in there. I said, so I sent him my only letter and told him I didn't think he'd be successful. Well, let me tell you, he really was. He really did a great job there. And then it's changed hands a couple of times since he passed away. He passed away at a young age. So did my grandfather. They all did. That's why I can't imagine me being here this long, because they all passed away 30 years before my birth. And that's about it. Oh, my dad's father was a farmer in Cumberland County, right up Route 11. I've forgotten the name of the church up there, but that's where I lived. I was born, and I lived in that little house there right beside the church when I was a youngster.
Where did you go to school?
Well, I went to Carlisle High School,
Okay.
And then I went up to Penn State for a short time, but my mother became ill, and I never graduated from Penn State when she became seriously ill. In fact, I was on my way to the Penn State Navy game, and it looked like rain. I went back to my dorm to get a raincoat, and then they had a message there that said, call this operator in Carlisle, and that's when the surgeon told me my mother probably wouldn't make it, I'd better hurry home. So I did. But she did make it, and I decided, hey, my parents were divorced when I was a youngster, about 10 years old, and she supported me my whole life, and I decided I'm going to do the same for her, as long as she make. And she, in a very short time, a couple months, she was back taking care of me again, of which I was going to school in the GI Bill, of course, and I went back up there the day after I came back from here. Well, that would have been a Saturday. It would have been a Monday. I went back up to state to quit. I had more difficult time quitting school than I did getting in, because I wanted to have the option of returning with the GI Bill. Mm-hmm. And you better have a good reason to quit or you don't get the GI Bill, which I did. I finally convinced them after going to about 4 or 5 offices. I finally convinced them that, hey, I'll be back. Well, I never went back because I got a job, and I was fortunate the way things happened, to tell you the truth.
Well, where did you end up working then?
I ended up working in the crystal industry, at the Hunt Corporation, which was one of the founders of the crystal industry. I don't know if you're familiar with that, in Carlisle. During World War II, it was like 5 industries. Anyhow, it was a manufacturer of piezoelectric crystals. I ended up as vice president of the company after not too many years. I was young vice president, and that's, I guess, the reason I didn't go back to college, because financially, I probably wouldn't have done any better if I had graduated from school, but I still wanted that piece of paper, you know.
Yeah.
And well, it never worked out. Anyhow, I ended up working 57 years in the crystal industry. Started out as a laborer. I ended up as the engineer. I did most of the design work for the last 30, 40 years.
Designing crystals?
Designing crystals.
What does that involve?
Well, you have to, thickness of the quartz plate. They're made out of quartz plates. Thickness, diameters, electrode size, plate back, spurious composition. There's all kind of things you have to. So I was lucky enough I had a good teacher, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Now, is that a lot of math, or?
It's what?
Is that math?
Most of it, yeah. Which was good for me, because that was the only thing that I was really good at in high school. I was a great mathematician, but compared to perhaps you in journalism, you had other things that you were an expert at. And math was the other thing I was really good at.
Well, how did you come to be involved with the Second Presbyterian Church?
Well, I was born into it. My mother took me when I was that big to the church. I was baptized there. Joined the church when I was 13 years old. Was married there. My daughter was baptized there. I've been there ever since. I didn't know anything different. I've just been and my grandmother, she went to that church too. That's my mother's mother. On my mother's side, my father's side didn't go there. They went to a country church. But I didn't know anything different. People asked me many times, why'd you go to the Second Presbyterian Church? It's the only place I knew. Great place.
Even growing up next to that country church, you still attended Second Pres?
Well, I was only a baby when I lived there. I probably left that church, or that homestead, the old farm homestead, when I was probably 1 or 2 years old. No later than that. I grew up in Carlisle.
So then, this was the church on Hanover.
Correct.
Yeah.
The corner of Hanover, where the Salvation Army is today, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, what are your memories of the old church then?
Great memories. One of the worst memories I had was the Sunday school room. It was a real dark. It was all wood panel, and Sunday morning it was cold in there. And that's what I remember. I remember Sunday school. I said, "Gee, I didn't learn much in Sunday school. I was so cold all the time that I don't remember much." But I didn't have any extra memories. Well, when it came time for me to join the church, we had class. We had to go to the pastor's manse, which was down the South Hanover Street, just a couple of blocks. And after school on Monday, there were 4 of us joined my class at that time, and we had to go there and study for an hour or so after school, which we didn't like to do. You know, after high school, what do I want to do? Well, in high school, I was 13, was I 7th or 8th grade. Mm-hmm. But 4 of us joined. I still remember all 4 of them. And only one of them's living today. I'll tell you his name. You want to know his name?
Sure.
Roger Urban. He's a lawyer in Carlisle. He and I were in that class, and there was 2 other fellows. One name was Raymond Black. He's passed, and Dick Schechter, who's dead, was professor up at the college. He passed too. But there were 4 of us went there, and I don't recall as a youngster having anything outstanding. The only thing I do remember was my pastor in those days. I'll never forget him. Of course, he's the first one that influenced my life a lot, and I always wondered what's God look like. He's got to look like Reverend Davis, or Reverend Schaefer. Dr. Schaefer was the pastor, and I thought he was the greatest guy ever. Naturally,
Yeah.
growing up, that's what you learn when you're young.
Would this have been around like 1940 or?
When I joined the church in '44.
Okay.
So well, 74 years this year. Woo. Yeah, that's when it would have been, and I joined under him, and then his successor is the one that married me, of course.
You mentioned Dr. Schaefer played a big role in your life.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I guess what I remember mostly from him was the Ten Commandments.
Okay.
And I've tried to live my life from that. I'm sure I know I failed many times. But it was his teaching of that really inspired me to go. In fact, at one time I thought I'd want to be a minister, but I never. That was all a childhood dream, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because of his teaching of the Ten Commandments. That's what I remember most. Now, what do you remember when you're a little kid? But I remember the Ten Commandments, and these are the things you want to live by. And I've tried my best to do that, but I'm sure I failed many times.
Did he teach Sunday school, or was that just in his sermons?
No, that was just in his service. No, he did not teach Sunday school. I had many teachers in Sunday school.
Okay.
Over the years, he changed every year.
And then, so you mentioned that your parents were divorced when you were young.
Right.
But that your mother and you continued to attend Second Pres.
Correct.
So I'm wondering sort of what role the church played in your family's sort of daily social life or just daily life.
My mother wasn't big on attending that. We were Sunday school or Sunday attendees. She wasn't active in the church at all, other than going to church. Up until her later years in life, she became more active in the new church. Her last few years than I did. I became more active in the church after I got out of the service, and then attended many committees and stuff like that I served on.
Now, was your mother working at this point, so she just wasn't able to?
She went to
attend?
work during World War II, so that's probably one of the reasons. She supported two sons, my brother and I, and she never remarried or anything. But she supported two sons working 8 hours a day at a crystal plant, the same place that I worked, and a waitress at night down Harrisburg Pike. It used to be Howard Johnson's restaurant. She was working 16 hours a day to support two bad kids, right? Now you know why I quit college.
Yeah?
Yes. But she did for sacrifice of me. I figure I could do that.
I'm guessing this might be Dr. Schaefer, but what was your first memory of a significant event related to the church?
Gee. That's a tough. I can't think of anything. When my grandmother died, but I was an adult then. I wasn't a youngster. I remember trying to go into the church. She was in the hospital just in surgery, and this is my grandmother, my mother's mother, who I was very close to. And they said she wouldn't pass, she wouldn't live. So I wanted to pray for her, and I wanted to go to church. So I went to our church. This was down on Hanover Street then. I couldn't get in. It was locked. And I went to 2 or 3 churches around town. They were locked. I finally found one, a Methodist church on the corner of Pomfret and West Street, open. And that's where I went to pray for my grandmother. And you know what? She was 86 then. She lived to be 94. don't tell me about the power of prayer. I'm a believer.
Well, there you go.
You betcha.
Just to clarify, I'm wondering if what was your maternal grandmother's name?
Her name was Elizabeth Williams. She was married to Williams, who owned the St. Charles Cafe.
Okay.
That was her husband.
And then your parents' names?
My parents' name was Bruce Calaman and Helen Calaman.
Okay. So it's good to have them going back. And
Yeah.
so you mentioned Dr. Schaefer and then Pastor Davis.
Pastor Davis was, he succeeded Dr. Schaefer.
Okay.
Pastor Davis, you want to know a little bit about him?
I what?
He came there when I was in the service. I went in the service in 1950. And when I got out 4 years later, 54, first Sunday I'm going to church, and I got there 10, 15 minutes early church. I couldn't get a seat. Are you kidding me? The place was jammed with people. I said, what's going on here? So they were piping the whole service into a Sunday school room. I had to sit back in that Sunday school room and listen to him. I couldn't see him. And I found, why so many people come to this church now? Because it was a big sanctuary.
Yeah.
He said, well, the church up at Dickinson burned down, and I remember reading that. They sent me the newspaper. It burned down in 1952, I think, or 53. It's now where the president's house is, the corner,
Okay, yeah.
right across from the library.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the church was. That was the college church. I think it was a Methodist church. Yeah. Well, this Pastor Davis, who I ended up respecting a whole lot, was such a dynamic preacher. All those people went down to that church, to our church, till they built a new one, you know?
Yeah.
And it was that way for, well over a year that I remember. Well, I went to school when I got out, so I wasn't here most of the time for the next year or so. But he was a dynamic preacher, I'll tell you. He could preach. Boy, he had them squirming in the pews. I respect him a lot. And he ended up marrying me, to tell you the truth. That was several years later, of course. I wasn't a teenager when I got married either.
Yeah.
In fact, my wife, can you tell about her?
Yep.
She was Episcopalian and went to the church on the square. And we started dating when I quit school. I met her through her boss, tell you the truth. She worked here, right here, up here in the alley at was Line and Line Jewelry Store. And Mr. Line, he saw me, he said, what are you doing? I told him the whole story. He says, gee, well, you ought to have a date. I have this young lady that you'd really be impressed with. I said, yeah, right. He may talk to her on the phone. He introduced me to her on the phone. Made a date, a blind date. I said, blind dates never work. Well, 62 years later, we were living, so that worked anyway. And she ended up joining the church. She wanted to get married in her church, of course. Yeah. And I said, no, I'm not getting married in that church. I'm getting married in my church, or we're not getting married. But she went and bought that, and I guess maybe we went to a couple of years, yeah. She ended up joining my church before we got married. She said, that's the only way I'll do it. And we talked to Reverend Davis, the minister at his home, and he thought it was a good idea, and it worked out.
And your wife's name?
Shirley.
Shirley.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you lucked out that Reverend Davis there was so dynamic.
Yeah, exactly right. He was.
So you mentioned that you and Shirley were married in the church. I'm wondering, do you remember what that day was like, or sort of the
Indeed ceremony? I do. September 1st, it was so hot I thought I'd die in that church. But we didn't have air conditioning in that church, and we had the reception down in the upstairs where the kitchen was, and naturally, and the Sunday school rooms. And the ladies of the church prepared all that for us. We did everything in the church. We became involved in. What I remember mostly was the heat. Yeah. Oh my! I remember it was so hot, and we're standing back there, back of it was in the Sunday school where they had an entrance into the main sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
My brother's my best man. He's there shining my shoes, you know, and looked out the door. Oh my, all these people coming in. Reverend Davis walks up behind me and he said, "Well, Dick, you ready to get married?" I said, "Boy, I'm not sure, Doc." He said, "What?" And he says, "You're not sure?" And I said, "Well, I'm a little nervous. I was nervous as a deal."
Yeah.
He said, "Well, if you're not ready, I can go out there and tell those people to go home." I said, "You would?" He said, "I've done it before and I'd do it again." But we didn't do that.
Yeah.
He calmed me down with my nervousness. I've never so nervous in all my life as I can remember. I don't know why, but I wanted to get married, and I did.
Yeah. What was it like seeing Shirley walk down the aisle then?
Most beautiful thing I ever saw.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit.
Never
I said
calmed down?
I knew I was doing the right thing when I saw her coming down.
Oh, good. Then you had the reception upstairs?
Yes. Prepared by the ladies of the church.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something about the ladies of the church. These are the older ladies. Actually, well, I gave them a check for their services and all the other people that are involved, you know.
Yeah.
We went on our honeymoon, come back in a week, 10 days, whatever, I don't remember. And we were only home 1 or 2 days, a rap on our door. And we have a second floor apartment, you know, like people starting out. Rap on our door, I go, here's the lady of the church. One of the ladies was doing that thing. She said, come in, come in. She handed me that check back. I said, "This is for you ladies for doing this." They had programs that they could use money for. She said, "You don't understand, Dick. We don't do this for money. We do this because we love you kids." Oh, man, I got the lump. I could hardly talk. Never, I mean, how can you not like church when you have people like that?
Yeah.
Right. End of story.
So who took over after Pastor or Reverend Davis?
After David, I happened to write it down. A fellow by the name of McCracken.
Okay.
And he was a retired Navy veteran, a chaplain in the Navy. And he didn't stay long. I think the people of the church got tired of hearing his Navy stories, to tell you the truth. He wasn't there very long. And then after him followed a good guy who spent 30-some years there. Happened to be Jackie Ferguson's husband, Mike. Did a terrific job. He and Larson,
Yep.
they became pastor, co-pastor. I mean, what a team. They were the greatest team that ever happened, I think, in Christianity, those two. I mean, they worked day and night, and they did a fantastic job, especially with the youth of our church. They did just a tremendous job. Two people. Mike Ferguson, he and I became pretty close friends. Besides being my minister, he was a good friend. And Jack Larson to this day is.
Did you have any children, or?
Just we had one daughter.
And did she go through sort of the youth services with?
Same thing with me, and she still goes to this day.
Okay.
She was baptized by. She was baptized by McCracken. Yeah.
One of the few things that he was there for.
Yeah. Right.
All right.
After him, do you want to know some more ministers?
Sure.
Well, Reverend Gilchrist followed Mike Ferguson when he died. In fact, I was on the committee that helped bring him here, called Pastor Nominating Committee. We spent 13 months deciding on him. No kidding. Can you imagine that? And we never missed a week. We met every week for 13 months. And we finally got him down to, I think we had 154 applicants for the, I think it was a tremendous number. And we kept whittling it down, finally got a hold of this guy, Gilchrist, I'll tell you. He's phenomenal. He too was a phenomenal speaker.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I asked him, I was a representative, I was a trustee at that time, and I was interested in the money part of the church, right? So I asked him when the interview, I said, how are you about giving sermons on money, donating money to the church? No problem with that, he said. I'm good at that. And he ended up as a graduate from, I think it was Harvard or Yale, one of the two.
Yeah.
And he's a poor boy from Pittsburgh. His dad worked in a steel mill. I said, wait a minute. How in the world's a poor kid from Pittsburgh go to Harvard? He said, did you ever hear the Rockefeller Fountain? Wasn't it Rockefeller? What's the other rich people
Carnegie?
in Pittsburgh? I've forgotten the name right off the bat. They were in the money business. So, anyhow,
yeah.
They gave scholarships out every year. And he said, did you ever hear of that? Of course I heard of that. He said, well, I won. That's how I got to go to Harvard. But another question I asked him in his interview, if you come here, how many years would you stay? Would you think you'd stay? He says, 11. Why 11? That would be the minimum number, he said. He said, because I have a daughter that's just starting to school here, and I want her to graduate from Carlisle schools, and I'll stay till she graduates, and then I might leave. And you know what? That's exactly what happened. He left and went back to Pittsburgh, and just a gigantic church up there, a Presbyterian church, and I don't know how many pastors they have, but he's the lead pastor. Yeah. Here I am talking about pastor. I don't know if you want to hear that or not.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, he was good. And then when he left, we have our present pastor, Reverend Gilchrist, which is another good man. He's been here 8 or 9 years now.
So you've mentioned that, especially after you got back from Korea, you served on, you became pretty heavily involved, and then you mentioned you were on the committee that brought in
Right.
Pastor Gilchrist.
Right.
Excuse me. What other committees did you serve on? Maybe early on, or?
Well, almost all my time was served on as a trustee. I had several bouts, what they call 3 years at a time. I had several of those, and when you serve in those committees, as our charge was naturally to take care of the finances of the church, and there's umpteen committees. Presbyterians are big on committees.
Yeah.
Every time you talk about something, we'll have a committee for it. I must have served on all of them at one time or another, a lot of them anyway. But since my duties to bring Pastor Gilchrist, I haven't been as active. I've been a Sunday guy rather than all those nights that we spent up there. So.
Now, so what would being a trustee involve then?
Well, it was mostly the management of the finances.
Okay.
That's basically their job, the trustees at time. That has changed this year. Reverend Cabellis, he changed it all. He thought, hey, the trustees, they have a budget, they perform and make the budget up and everything, but then it has to be approved by the session, the elders of the church anyhow. So he said, why don't we just join those two and have one committee? We'll just call it the session. And all the people who are trustees are now members of the session, and they've reduced the number so they don't have an overlap of too many people. But he's changed that just this year. And in fact, it's only been a matter of a few months. It just happened. It took him 8 years, I guess, before he got enough courage to ask to have that change, because everything in the Presbyterian Church, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's all done by committees like the government. It's run by the church, rather the parishioners that go there. They select a minister. You know, we have a committee and we recommend. They vote on it, just like you do the presidency of the country. I know a lot of other churches that they are assigned pastors, but not in our church, not in the Presbyterian Church. You gotta supply or have the support of all the commissioners, which was one of the problems when we decided to change churches. I'm sure you'll get around to that.
Well, yeah, I was just about to ask. I mean,
Yeah.
so you mentioned that you had a lot of fond memories of the church on
You bet.
Hanover Street.
Yeah.
What was it like when, I guess, Pastor Ferguson, decided and the church decided to move to Garland?
Well, actually, it was decided by a couple of members of our church. One was a doctor in town who doesn't live here anymore. He said the church is so old, we needed so many repairs to bring it update to all the regulations that the state and federal government have and everything. He says, I'll tell you, we can build a new one for what it'll cost us to renovate this old place. And parking was always a problem. I used to park in a parking lot. It was back of the Eagles parking lots back on Pumper Street. I'd park up there in their parking lot Sunday morning because they didn't have a lot of business, I guess, on Sundays. And a lot of people parked there. It was difficult to park along the street and so forth. And so a lot of people were for this. 50% of the people, 49% of the people didn't want to move, of which I was one. 51% did. That's how the church was split right down the middle. Just terrible time in that church. Now, this was brought about and debated probably for 2-3 years before it actually came about. So we finally did. 51% said yes. My group said no. And you can understand why I said no. This is the only church I love this place. I don't want to move. So I lost. So then one of our meetings, I made this speech. I said, okay, we lost. Now let's work and make this thing work. You know what? This is the best decision the church ever made where we're at now. Really, I was wrong. They were right. But, we have a nice place now.
Were you a trustee at the time, or?
No, I was trustees when they started talking about it, but then I served that time and wasn't trustee till later on.
Okay.
No, I was not. I was not. And I wasn't even involved in the fundraising to raise the church. That was good.
I'm wondering, who were some of the people that were involved with that process that you remember?
At that time, well, Bill Maslin, who's one of the Maslins there, he was the chairman of the fundraising committee, I know, and let me see if I wrote that down. No, I don't have it. I think, as I recall, Bill Maslin was the lead driver of that fundraising. I don't remember who else was involved.
I think maybe Bud Gardner.
Bud Gardner, it certainly was, because he worked at Maslin.
Yeah.
Bud was one of them. I'm glad you mentioned that. I guess his wife told you about that.
Yeah.
She sure did. They did, and very active in the church. They were, and she is to this day. Bud's passed, but Bud was real active. In fact, I served on trustees with Bud more than once, and a lot of committees. Bud was a good leader. Let's see, who else? I don't know, there was 2 other people that were active then. I don't know if they were active at that time. One was Monty Shoemaker, who was a manager of one of the shoe factories in Carlisle. And I don't know if he was part of it or not. And Bob Brown, who was president of Tire and Wheel today, who's Carlisle Rubber Company in those days. And I'm not sure either one were here at that time when we changed. Because that's been like 1972, I think we built that church. I don't know if somebody else might have given me the exact date. I think that's about 72 that they have. And I don't remember who else was involved. I bet you Gina Schlossnagle was probably one of them, because he's been there for a long time too.
He might have been.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
He might have been. Gene. Yeah, because Gene's older than me. Bob Fry, you know Bob Fry, the attorney?
Mm-hmm.
Not his son now, who's Rob is the attorney now. Bob's physically not able to practice anymore.
Yeah.
He would have been very active in it. In fact, Bob Fry ended up buying our church and sold it to the Salvation Army. He bought the building.
Yeah.
Because he had tons of money. Shouldn't have said that. But money, I don't think, was a problem with him.
Yeah.
But he did. He ended up buying the church, the building itself. He didn't call it the church, but he's done a lot for our church, really, Bob. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, were there any other sort of particular events or church issues that you remember sort of over the course of your time at Second Pres?
Boy, I can't think of anything that's outstanding, stands out in my mind. Would have been good or bad. I don't think of it. I can't think of anything good or bad. My experience has all been good.
Well, maybe what are some of the changes aside from moving from downtown?
Well, most of the changes they changed when the pastor changed. Of course, they all have their way of doing things, and some want to be leaders, and some don't. They want everybody else, the church, the parishioners, to be the leaders of your church, and other ones, they say, "I am the king," but and that doesn't go over too good sometimes. There's pros and cons in church too, just like there are politics. I think maybe churches come too political sometimes. Sorry, I can't answer it any better than
No, that's fine. Are there any other trustees that you remember serving with? You mentioned Bob.
Oh, yeah. Jim Humer was an old-time family at our church. His mother was, she was like a saint. She was really a leader. And Jim Humer was an attorney in Carlisle. He was a son. He's long past too. He's much older than me. But he was the president of the trustees the first time I became a trustee, which was probably in the 60s someplace. He's all past too. Monty Shoemaker, the guys that I just mentioned. Monty Shoemaker, he was the president of trustees. Bob Brown was another guy. These are all, and Bud Gardner.
Yep.
These are all people that I serve with on the trustees. Yeah. If I can divert a little bit.
Sure.
Serving that pastor nominating committee that I was telling you about to bring Gilchrist here, to me that was the highlight of my whole service with the church, because I never had anything that inspired me so much as that, really. And there were 9 people on the committee, and these were people that I became very close friends with, and I really enjoyed being it. And some of their names were Al Maslin, who is now a judge. Al was on it. Bob Beard, who I work with today at the church once a month on a Sunday. Bob Beard, he still works there. Marion Johnson, was a doctor. She was a physician. Her husband was a surgeon in Carlisle. Husband and wife team. She's a great lady. And can you imagine this? A black guy, a Negro, a guy named Peter Alexander, who he and I became great friends. He was a dean at the law school. Great guy, a bachelor, could sing like a canary. In fact, we went together out to Indianapolis to interview a pastor out there. And we went to the church service, and we're sitting in the pew singing, And after the service is over, this little old lady sitting in the pew in front of us turned around. She says, "I just wondered who that beautiful voice was." I said, "Oh, that was me." Well, it wasn't me. It was Peter Alexander, who had a terrific voice, and one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. Good Christian too. And And the chair of our committee to bring pastor here was Jenny Hirschberger. Her father was a doctor here in Carlisle, and he was his daughter. In fact, I was part of the nominating committee to select a committee, okay? And her father was chairman of that committee. So we end up with 7 or 8 people, and he said, we need 9. And he said, I reluctantly want to nominate a young lady, he said, who wants to be on this committee, and the word go. He said, but I'm reluctant to do it. And then he finally said, it's my daughter, Virginia, who is an attorney by education. We ended up making her the chairman of our committee. She did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, enough talk about me.
No. So we've talked a little bit about sort of the church and, I guess, the makeup of the church in terms of the committees, the people you served with. But I'm wondering, do you remember any community issues that the church has been involved with over time?
Well, I think our church has become more involved with the community in the last few years. In fact, the last 3 years, very active. The pastor today is really interested in this, and they become involved with the new Hope. What's it called? Hope
Station.
Hope Station. You were there, and a couple of the. School, Lee Tort School. We become involved with that.
Okay.
With the lower class school, where we put some money into that down there and come with there. But the pastor today really wants to become involved more in our community, and before more than any other pastor we ever had. This pastor really wants to do this with the Muslims. Mm-hmm. He invited the Muslims to our church. We had Muslims come to our church, have lunch with them or dinner with them. Yeah. And we go there, they come here. He thinks that we got to be doing this sort of thing. So there are 3 things that we really become involved with. We also were very involved with the place that feed up at Dickinson. They're up at Dickinson.
Project Share?
Yeah, Project Share. Our church has been very involved in that. Good Samaritan Fellowship, of which Bob Beard, a member of our church, is very active in. Was very active. I don't know if he still is or not. In the founding of it.
This is jumping back a little bit, so I apologize.
Good.
But I'm just thinking back on my conversation with Jack Larson, and he mentioned putting out a lot of plays, and
did he?
Very popular.
Yep.
I was wondering, did your daughter participate in that?
Absolutely. She was a youngster, and I went to every performance, I guess. She was very active, and she and Mike Ferguson, that's what I tell you, those 2 guys just worked day and night putting these things on, and they were just fantastic. You couldn't believe how good they were.
Yeah.
And Larson being a musician beside a pastor, there's a lot of music, let me tell you, and I just loved it. Yeah, it's very good. So Jack mentioned that. Well, he was one of the leaders, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, are there any sort of plays or musicals or anything that stands out?
Well, yes. I can't think of the name of them, but something about the flood, Noah's flood. And all these kids were dressed up. For example, my daughter had something like she's supposed to be a bird because she was taking ballet at the time.
Yeah.
And she came balleting down this aisle, to the front with this costume like a bird, And that's the way it was. The whole show was about Noah's Ark. Mm-hmm. And had some great music. I remember sitting there singing with them because I learned the songs. I saw so many performances, and it was really great. Yeah. And I think those 2 pastors, I believe they got burned out after that. They worked so hard.
Yeah.
I really believe it. Yeah. But Jackie's still going to this day. Yeah. He and my daughter, unusual. Jack Larson and my daughter were born the same day, just 50 years difference, or no, 30 years different. My daughter's 50-4. Jack's 82, I think. So, yeah, born the same day. Can you imagine? January 13th.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I only have a couple more questions here.
Okay. Hope I can answer them.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Do you recall a time when faith played a particularly important role in your life, or?
I don't know. Maybe that my like I told you about my grandmother's passing. I think really it would hit me. You know, it was in church one Sunday in Misawa, Japan, and the chaplain then gave a service that I thought he was aiming it just at me. And at that time, I think maybe I had a greater feeling of what church meant to me than I did any other time. I was in Korea during the Korean thing. Spent a couple of years there, well, over a year and a half maybe. And then back to Japan. I was back and forth Japan and Korea all during that time, during the early 50s. And I think that service probably meant as much to me as any other service I ever had. And it wasn't because of any fear I had of flying, because I was in the Air Force. We flew in missions over in Korea. It wasn't that. It was just, and I don't remember what it was about, but I remember saying to one of my officers, I was an enlisted man at the time, and one of the pilots that I flew with, I became very friendly with, who was a deeply religious man. I talked to him about it. And here he had been a prisoner of war during World War II over in Germany. He got shot down over there. And he told me, he says, after we talked about it, he said, I can understand why you feel that way, because the same thing happened to him 20 years prior, 20, more than that. It was 40 years prior to that, wasn't it? Yeah, World War II, and this was 50. It was only 10. It was only 10 years. Yeah. And he said the same thing happened to me. So we ended up not only being my pilot and my officer, but we ended up being close friends because of that. I think our belief in God. Yeah, I believe that.
Do you think just seeing sort of the horrors of war, or that you were particularly open to that? Or?
I don't know why. I can't answer you. I don't know why. I just know that God played a more important time in my life at that time, and than it did before. That's all I can say.
Well, I'm wondering then. So, how has your faith journey influenced your life over your years since maybe that moment?
Well, hopefully I've been a better person than I would have been without it. Tell you the truth, that's all I can tell you. And I'm not a minister. I don't go around preaching and telling about my faith, but I know my beliefs. And my wife has often brought that up to me. She says, "You're strong. You believe. You won't change, will you?" And no, I won't.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned that you had, this moment in Japan, and then I imagine coming home to, or I guess, no, at that point, you would have already had Dr. Schaefer and those memories of the Ten Commandments, but then coming home and seeing Reverend Davis and sort of having him being as dynamic as he was.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been lucky. I had a good life.
Sounds it.
Yeah, I did. And, and my time in Korea wasn't anything, I was never afraid. Even though I was accused of it by a flight surgeon. I had these terrible stomach pains for a couple of days. I don't know if I was having appendicitis or what, but I made terrible pains. I finally went to see the flight surgeon who did our medical thing, and he said, "You're with the Air Rescue Service, aren't you?" And our job was to to fly up. We flew 500 feet off the water, and if you went north of the 38th parallel, that was considered a combat mission because that's where North Korea was. And our jets were flying up there in Big Alley, and they'd get shot down or have flame out, bail out, and our job was to land the water and pick them up, which was fine. And I never had any real problem. We had a cover, which we called air rescue cover. They were 4 jets flying up at 35,000. In case we ran into any trouble, we just called them and they took care of it. Believe me, we didn't even have a gun on. The only gun we had in our ship was a .45 pistol they gave me. I had to carry here, and what good would that do?
Yeah.
But why did I start this tale? Oh, this flight surgeon. He says to me, "You guys, you're in that 3rd Air Rescue Service." "Yeah, yes, sir, I am." "They're flying you guys day and night up there, aren't they?" I said, "Yeah, flying a good bit." He said, "You're afraid of flying." I said, "What? I'm not afraid of flying. I flew 100 missions over there."
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, "I'm never afraid of flying in my life." So that's what he accused of. He said he couldn't find anything wrong with me. Okay, I'm afraid. Goodbye. So I left. So I was telling my CO then about this. He asked me, my commanding officer asked me about, "Hey, how'd you make out with that thing?" And I told him the story about afraid of flying. He said, "Yeah, Calaman, you're afraid of flying. Who's the first one down here in a flight line every morning looking for a ride? You." He said, "Don't tell me you're afraid of anything." End of story.
I'll just ask, were there any missions that stood out in Korea?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
More than one. Yeah. I'll tell you one.
Okay, yeah.
This fella bailed out and floated down. And the tides in Japan or off of Korea are the 2nd largest in the world. The tide goes out and there's nothing but mud flats for hundreds of yards. Well, this guy landed on one of these mud flats instead of out in the water. Well, we can't get him on a mud flat, right?
Yeah.
So here comes the North Korean army we see coming up along the shore, and they're far enough, they're shooting at him. Are you kidding me? This is terrible. And now they're not hitting him yet.
Yeah.
But there's hundreds of these guys, and he's way out. I mean, you gotta realize how long these mud flats are. They couldn't get him. So we called air rescue. This fit up above us, these jets. Stand by. And our call signal was Dumbo, because our plane looked like a big old dumb thing. So they called us Dumbo. "Stand by, Dumbo. We'll take care of it." Well, pretty soon, here they come. 4 of them, one right after another, which is the old German technique. They go down and strafe that beach, and I just saw bodies flying like mad. Now, here I am, and I sitting there thinking in the plane, I'm cheering like a cheerleader,
Yeah.
Go get him, man, this is great. And afterwards, I thought, how cruel can it be? I mean, these are human beings, they're just killing them like mad. And I'm cheered? There must be something matters with my mind. And that's probably the one story that I remember most, mostly about myself. I said, why would I do that? But I did. Yeah.
Was the airman rescued, or?
Oh yeah, well, the water, we waited. The tide started coming in. He was in a they call him a dinghy.
Okay.
He was in that, floated right out in the ocean. We landed, picked him up, took him back.
Nice.
Yeah, saved him.
Well, actually, so you mentioned that you only received one letter from your father. When you were
Yeah,
overseas.
we weren't big letter writers. Neither was I.
Well, did you have more of a correspondence with your mother, or?
Well, my mother, she
brother?
would write to me, but I never wrote a lot of letters. In fact, she didn't hear. I didn't even tell her I was in Korea, to tell you the truth. She thought I was in Japan
The entire time?
for a long time. All right. She wrote a letter to my commanding officer saying, why wouldn't her son write letters? He was furious. He called me in there. He said, I'll tell you what, Calaman, you come in here once a week with a letter and you show it to me. And that's why I had to do that for a couple weeks to prove to him that I should write home. And that's when she found out. Well, actually, she found out of a story in the New York Times newspaper, there was a story about my crew, and it had my name in it. God, it was terrible. That's how she found out. A friend of hers was in New York, lived in New York, and had this time. She sent her this copy of your son. I didn't know your son was in Korea. That's how she found out I was over there. This was a story. It was another story about a flight that we had, and there was nothing dangerous. Well, we lost an engine. We only had 2 engines. And when you say you lost an engine, that means it just won't run. You didn't lose it. So we lost 1 engine. Now we're only 500 feet off the deck, right? Well, the pilot, he ended up getting us up to a couple of thousand feet altitude with 1 engine, and now we're trying to make our way back to home base, which was in Seoul. We were landing in Seoul, and we just so happened we had that time a reporter from back in the States, and we never carried reporters on a plane. This was the only trip that I can remember we had this reporter. Well, he writes this story and makes it sound really terrific, how dangerous it was and everything. And Sergeant Calaman gets on the radio and rears back, makes it sound dramatic. And it wasn't really that bad. And we ended up landing okay. And back, so he sends his story back to his newspaper, and makes us all sound like heroes. Well, I wasn't a hero, Oh, I was just sitting there doing my job. I was a radio guy just sending code, and, the pilot did the job, flying that thing on 1 engine. Did a terrific job. And can you imagine this pilot was from York, Pennsylvania?
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Good guy. Yep. But anyhow, that's how my mother found out I was in Korea.
So what was that? What was the next letter like that you got from her?
Why didn't you tell me? Was the her thing. Chewed me out first. Really gave me the devil, but she was glad I got back.
I can imagine.
Well, I didn't, honestly, I never felt in any danger. In fact, I kept this telling story. I know you want to hear this.
No, I enjoy it.
And you get, when they're air crew member like I was, every time you flew 25 missions, you were given the opportunity to go back to the States. So I got my 25 in a hurry, and they called me and I said, no, I don't want to go back to the States. He said, well, then you'll have to sign a waiver. I said, fine, give me the paper. I signed a thing, and I flew another 25. They called me in again, and it's kept up every 25 missions. They had to sign this waiver. And most of the guys in my outfit said, I can't understand you. Why wouldn't you want to go home? Hey, I'm having a good time. I wasn't any problem. We had a good time. I only spent, we'd spend my crew, my home base was in Misawa, Japan. We fly over there with an aircraft, and every 50 hours of an aircraft, it has to be re-inspected. So our missions would usually end about 4 hours. So we go over 10 to 12 missions. Then we had to fly back to Japan. Have it inspected again, another, 2 or 3 more crews were over, and then another month we back to Korea again. And we kept doing that back and forth, but this wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
I was having a good time. That's why I didn't want to come back to the States.
And you hadn't met Shirley yet, so...
No, I hadn't met Shirley. I had nobody back here. My girl had written me a Dear John letter, so... the one I had here all through high school. So I didn't see any reason to come home, to tell you the truth. In fact, when I got back to Frisco 2.5 years later, I didn't come. Everybody else, when we landed, everybody jumping on the first train or plane to get home. This friend of mine, who I just received a call from the other day, last week in fact, from Minneapolis, we together, and he says, Dickie, you want to go back to Pennsylvania? I said, no reason for me to hurry. He said, he's from Minnesota. He said, no, me either. We spent a week in San Francisco before we were in home. He wrote a book, about 400 and some pages. I just got a copy of it last week. He just wrote the book. That's why he called me 2 weeks ago. He said, yeah, we used to go out to be out in a little town of Misawa, an old fishing village in northern Japan, having a beer. And we'd be there, and he'd pull out of his pocket a little notebook, and he'd I said, Charlie, what are you doing? He says, one day I'm going to write a book, and all you guys are going to be in it. You know what? Took him 50 years, but he wrote the book. And he was a journalist. He worked for this Minneapolis Tribune for 32 years. And he just finally wrote this book.
What's the title? Something
about rescue. So it's more, to me, it's like an autobiography. I told him, he says not an autobiography. If memoirs, it sounds like an autobiography. I don't know if you'd be interested. I was, because it's about him.
Yeah.
Something about rescue. What's the name? I've forgotten the name of it. I'll give you a call if you want to.
Sure.
If you're interested.
Yeah.
Something about rescue. Let's see. I don't remember the title. I just finished it day before yesterday.
And were you in it?
Yeah. He mentioned my name 2 or 3 times. Yeah. One about this. One of the pallets I had over there, he happened to be friendly with in Minneapolis before he ever went overseas. And he worked for a newspaper. He was a writer for the newspapers, a reporter. And I never knew this. All this time we were there, this pal and he were friends. And that's how he got in our outfit, because he wanted him to be his PIO officer for them. And I told him, I said, oh, his name was Bob Sherman. He's the best damn pilot I ever flew with. And he mentions that in the book. He said, and he tells about one of these so-called rescues that we made. It he made it sound worse than it really was too. But he said that Dick Calaman said when he got back, he said, that's the best damn pilot I ever flew with, which true he was. He was the best. And a couple other, he mentions when we got back to the States, he said everybody hurried back except us. Anyhow.
All right, well, is there any, I always like to end by asking if there's anything I should have asked or you want to mention before we
let me look at my notes here.
Sure.
I don't think so. I think, in fact, I've talked too much.
Nonsense.
Too much about me. It's supposed to be about the church.
Well, it's about your memories of the church. So.
Yeah, okay. I have good memories of the church. No, this is all about me. She wrote, Mary, she wrote that. She said, these are things he may ask you.
No, I can certainly ask you if you want me to.
No, I think I told him most of it without being asked. I'm sorry I did. Yeah, we award any medals, or yeah, I got all kind of medals, so what? Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming in today and talking with me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking with you. I've just bringing back a lot of memories, to tell you the truth, that I didn't think about for a long time.